I found the second smartphone by accident, though afterward I told myself there are no accidents in marriages built on unequal foundations. It was wedged beneath the felt lining of the ebony piano bench in the music room of our London townhouse, where the afternoon light falls in geometric patterns on the parquet and the air carries the perpetual scent of lemon oil and Elena's preferred bergamot candles. She spent hours in that room, claiming Chopin helped her think. I avoided it, not from any dislike of music, but because I had learned that a man who deals in absolutes finds little comfort in art that traffics in ambiguity. I was 68 when I married her. She was 32. The mathematics of it drew predictable commentary from tabloids and dinner parties, but numbers had always been my native language, and these particular digits seemed to balance in my favor. I am Benedict Hale, a man whose signature could redirect rivers of capital, whose handshake had sealed deals that kept small nations liquid. Yet that Tuesday afternoon, I stood in my own home with my pulse hammering against my collar as my fingers closed around smooth glass hidden beneath felt. A second phone, not the pearl-white iPhone I'd given her for Christmas, the one she used to photograph our meals and capture sunlight streaming through our bedroom windows. This device was matte black, utilitarian, corporate in its anonymity, no decorative case, no personalized wallpaper, no accumulated detritus of a life lived in public. It was a tool designed for privacy, and privacy, in my experience, was the first cousin of deception. I should have replaced it and walked away. A wiser man, or perhaps simply a more trusting one, would have recognized the boundary and honored it. Instead, I sat heavily on the bench and let the piano's fallboard settle with a whisper, as if the instrument itself understood the gravity of the moment. The screen responded to my touch with clinical efficiency. No biometric security, just a 6-digit passcode prompt. I attempted her birthday. Denied. Mine. Denied. Our anniversary. Denied. The device vibrated once. A mechanical warning that felt uncomfortably organic. Logic dictated retreat. Self-preservation counseled ignorance. I was reaching to return the phone when I noticed a small square of paper taped to the underside of the fallboard, nearly invisible unless one was looking at precisely the right angle. On it, written in the blue eyeliner pencil she used for quick notes, was a sequence, 847392. Not dates, not a pattern any ordinary person would recognize. I entered the digits. The screen unlocked like a door swinging open on a room I had never seen before. The interface was Spartanly organized, 10 applications arranged with surgical precision. Messages, Signal, Calendar, an encrypted Vault application whose corporate logo I recognized from security briefings, voice recorder, camera, and a folder labeled simply Work. No social media, no entertainment, no digital ephemera. This was not a device for living, it was an instrument for operating. The message threads read like fragments of a conversation conducted in code. Contact names that weren't names, Phoenix, Mercury, Nightingale, brief exchanges, most archived, many consisting of single words or numbers, coordinates with decimal precision, timestamps, photographs not of people, but of architecture, doorways, service entrances, the rear access points of buildings I recognized as properties in my portfolio. The calendar entries avoided the language of ordinary life. Instead of dinner or appointment, I found window, pickup, transit. Each entry was accompanied by a time and a location, usually somewhere within a 5-mile radius of our home. My chest tightened with something that wasn't quite jealousy. It was recognition, the way a chess player recognizes a gambit 3 moves before it reaches its conclusion. I pressed play on the most recent voice recording. The quality was professional grade. Footsteps on marble, the whisper of expensive fabric, then Elena's voice, unmistakably hers, but stripped of the warmth I associated with our private conversations. Her tone was businesslike, efficient. The south entrance clears at 22:15. Mercury handles the keypad. If there's resistance, reference the Belgrade shipment. A man's voice, too distant to identify, murmured acknowledgement. A door closed. Silence. Belgrade. I maintained a logistics office there, part of a network that facilitated cargo movement through the Balkans. The word shipment in Elena's mouth felt like ice water in my veins. I scrolled through the signal thread with Phoenix and found a pinned message, a photograph of a document fragment bearing the letterhead of Hale Maritime Solutions, my first company, officially dissolved 15 years earlier, but whose shipping codes still appeared occasionally in legacy contracts. My throat constricted. I rose from the bench and moved to the window, looking down at the mews where our security cameras maintained their silent vigil. Elena's second life was apparently conducted under my own roof, using resources I had provided in spaces I controlled. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. The encrypted vault required the same 6-digit code. Inside, I discovered folders organized by city: London, Belgrade, Tangier, Vienna, Prague. I opened London first. What I found was a complete dossier on my own household. Staff schedules cross-referenced with security rotations, architectural diagrams annotated in Elena's precise handwriting, photographs taken from angles that suggested someone had spent considerable time studying the blind spots in my surveillance system. The Belgrade folder contained customs documentation bearing shipping codes I hadn't seen in years, manifests for cargo described as electronic components, routed through warehouses I had divested myself of when the Hale Group went public. But the codes were mine, the routing signatures bore my corporate seal, and the timestamps were recent. Someone was using my past to facilitate their present, and my wife appeared to be choreographing the operation. I should have felt betrayed. Instead, I felt something closer to professional admiration. Elena had infiltrated my life with the patience of someone conducting a long-term intelligence operation. She had learned my patterns, identified my vulnerabilities, and positioned herself to exploit both. Whatever she was doing it with remarkable competence. The Tangier folder yielded the most disturbing discovery: photographs of Victoria Chen, my CFO for the past 8 years, entering what appeared to be a private dining room with 2 men I didn't recognize. Victoria was unimpeachably ethical, almost aggressively transparent, the kind of executive who documented every decision and copied legal on every communication that crossed her desk. If she was meeting with people from Elena's encrypted phone, then the architecture of my ignorance was more elaborate than I had imagined. I photographed several key documents with my own device, returned Elena's phone to its hiding place, and walked to my study with the sensation that the house had changed shape around me. I poured 3 fingers of Macallan and sat in the chair where I'd signed contracts worth billions, trying to reconcile the woman who brought me coffee each morning with the one whose voice I had just heard discussing entry points and security windows. The intercom buzzed, Elena's voice warm and immediate. "Darling, I'm making tea. Would you like some?" "Please," I managed, marveling at the steadiness of my own voice. She appeared minutes later carrying a tray, moving with the unconscious grace that had first attracted me at that charity dinner in Mayfair. She wore jeans and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a way that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. She looked like home, like safety, like the reward a man receives for surviving long enough to deserve something beautiful. "You look tired," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Long day," I replied, accepting the teacup. "How was yours?" "Quiet. I spent most of it reading." She gestured toward the music room. "And thinking about that Chopin piece I've been working on. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what he was trying to say." The casual mendacity was breathtaking. While I had been in meetings with auditors and supply chain managers, she had been orchestrating something that involved Belgrade shipments and security windows. She was either a consummate actress or had developed the ability to compartmentalize her life in ways that would impress a professional intelligence officer. "Which piece?" I asked. "The Ballade in G minor." It has this moment where the melody seems to collapse in on itself and then rebuilds from what you thought was wreckage. She smiled. It reminds me of marriage, actually. The way we break things and then discover we've created something stronger. The metaphor landed like a blade between my ribs. I managed to smile. How so? Well, we enter thinking we know the score, but then life introduces variations we never anticipated. We have to learn to improvise, to find harmony, even when the original composition no longer serves. She sipped her tea. The beautiful thing is when both players decide to write a new ending together. The conversation felt like a chess match conducted in a foreign language. Every sentence carried multiple meanings, and I couldn't determine whether Elena was speaking generally about marriage or specifically about whatever operation she was running from my house. "Are we writing a new ending?" I asked. Her eyes met mine directly. "I think we're discovering what the original composition was really about." After she left, I sat in the gathering darkness and considered my options. I could confront her directly, but that would forfeit any advantage of knowledge. I could launch my own investigation, but that risked alerting her to my discovery. I could pretend ignorance and hope her activities remained peripheral to my legitimate business interests, or I could do what successful men learn to do when the ground shifts beneath them. I could gather intelligence before making irreversible decisions. I opened my laptop and began researching. Elena Voss had entered my life 3 years earlier with impeccable credentials, a master's degree in linguistics from the Sorbonne, professional experience as a conference interpreter, references from organizations that provided translation services for international development work. But credentials can be manufactured and references can be cultivated. I had learned this lesson in business contexts. I should have applied the same skepticism to personal ones. I spent 2 hours retracing Elena's digital footprint and found something curious. Her online presence was remarkably consistent but curiously shallow. Her LinkedIn profile, her professional website, her social media accounts all told the same story, but with a precision that felt rehearsed. Most people accumulate digital detritus over years. Tagged photos, casual comments, the casual archaeology of a life lived online. Elena's presence was clean, purposeful, and recent. At midnight, I made a decision that would alter the trajectory of everything that followed. I retrieved a business card from my desk drawer, one I had kept for 5 years without using. Marcus Webb ran a discreet security consultancy that specialized in what he called information architecture, the art of discovering what people preferred to keep hidden. His services were expensive, his methods unorthodox, and his discretion absolute. I sent him a single message: "Need a consultation. Urgent but not emergency. Can you be in London tomorrow?" His reply arrived within 10 minutes. Arriving at 0800. "Will call with location." I finished my whiskey and climbed the stairs to our bedroom, where Eleanor lay reading, her face illuminated by the warm glow of her bedside lamp. She looked up as I entered. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Just some complications in the Belgrade office. Nothing that can't wait until morning." She nodded and returned to her book. I watched her for a moment, studying her profile, trying to detect any indication that she had noticed my absence, my agitation, my investigation. She appeared completely absorbed in her reading. The performance was flawless. In bed, I lay awake listening to the rhythm of her breathing and wondering whether the woman beside me was the Elena I had married or someone I had never actually met. The distinction felt crucial, but I suspected the truth would be more complicated than either alternative. Marcus Webb called at 7:30 the next morning and provided coordinates for a coffee shop in Shoreditch, the kind of place where conversations could be conducted without attracting attention from anyone who mattered. I told Elena I had an early meeting with investors and left the house carrying a manila envelope containing the photographs I had taken from her encrypted vault. Webb was exactly what I had expected. Mid-40s, unremarkable in every way that mattered, the kind of man who could disappear in a crowd of 3 people. He ordered black coffee and listened without interrupting as I explained the situation. "How long have you been married?" he asked when I finished. 3 years. "Children?" "None together. I have a son from my first marriage, but we're estranged." He nodded, making notes in a small leather journal. "The encrypted phone suggests professional-level operational security. The documentation indicates she has detailed knowledge of your business infrastructure. The timeline suggests this has been planned for considerably longer than 3 years. Planned for what purpose? That's what we need to determine." He closed the journal. "I'll need 48 hours for the initial assessment. During that time, maintain normal routines. Don't change anything that might alert her to your suspicions. What if she's planning something immediate? Then we'll know soon enough." He stood, leaving money on the table for both our coffees. "Mr. Hale, in my experience, operations of this sophistication don't conclude hastily. Whatever she's been building it carefully. That suggests she intends it to last." I returned home to find Elena in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the domestic competence that had always charmed me. She was humming something classical, possibly the Chopin piece she had mentioned the previous evening. She looked up as I entered, smiling with genuine warmth. "How was your meeting?" "Productive," I said. "The investors are interested in expanding our Eastern European operations." Something flickered across her expression, too brief to interpret with certainty, but unmistakably present. "That's wonderful," she said. "Belgrade is such a beautiful city. I spent some time there years ago working on a translation project for the EU. This was new information. In 3 years of marriage, Elena had never mentioned spending time in Belgrade. Either she had forgotten to include it in the carefully constructed narrative of her past, or she was testing whether I had discovered something that would make the reference significant. "What kind of project?" I asked. "Trade documentation. Very dry stuff, but it gave me a chance to explore the city. There's a remarkable fortress overlooking the Danube. You should visit when you're there on business." The conversation felt like we were circling around something neither of us wanted to name directly. I finished breakfast and retreated to my study, where I spent the day conducting normal business while waiting for Webb's assessment. His report arrived the following evening via encrypted email. Elena had been constructed, not born. Her background was professionally fabricated, but not recently. The deception had been in progress for at least 7 years, suggesting significant resources and long-term planning. The Belgrade connection was legitimate. She had worked there, but not for the EU. She had been employed by an organization that provided translation services for what Webb politely termed grey market logistics operations. More significantly, Elena Voss was not her original name. She had been born Katarina Novak in Sarajevo, had studied languages at university in Vienna, and had disappeared from official records for 3 years before re-emerging as Elena with a French education and a cleaned personal history. During her missing years, Webb had found traces of her involvement with an organization called Meridian Solutions, a consultancy that specialized in helping multinational corporations navigate complex regulatory environments in emerging markets. The phrase grey market logistics appeared repeatedly in Webb's report, along with a series of corporate names I recognized. Companies that had contracts with Hale Group subsidiaries, companies that handled cargo through ports where I maintained business relationships, companies whose activities I had never examined closely because they operated in the spaces between legal categories, and I had learned to trust specialists to manage such ambiguities. Webb's final paragraph was characteristically direct. Mrs. Hale appears to be conducting an intelligence-gathering operation focused on your business activities, specifically those involving cargo movement through Balkan and North African ports. The sophistication suggests state-level resources, but the timeline and personal commitment suggest private motivation. Recommend immediate but careful confrontation to determine intent and scope. I read the report 3 times, printed it, then deleted the digital copy and burned the printout in the fireplace. Elena found me there an hour later, staring into the flames. "You seem troubled," she said. I turned to face her. In the firelight, she looked younger, more vulnerable, or perhaps that was simply what I wanted to see. Katerina, I said quietly. Her composure never wavered, but something shifted behind her eyes. That's not a name I've heard in quite some time. How long were you planning to wait before telling me who you really are? She moved to the chair across from me, settling with the same graceful economy of movement that had characterized every action I had observed over 3 years. That depends on what you think you've discovered. I know about Belgrade. I know about Meridian Solutions. I know about the second phone. I watched her carefully. What I don't know is why. And Elena, or Katerina, was silent for a long moment, studying me with the analytical gaze I now recognized as her natural expression, the one she had learned to soften for our domestic interactions. When she spoke, her voice carried an accent I had never heard before, subtle but unmistakably Eastern European. My brother was killed in Mostar in 1998, not during the war. After. He was 17, working for a shipping company that moved supplies to refugee camps. A container exploded on the dock. 47 people died, including my brother. I waited. The fire snapped and settled. The investigation found that the container had been mislabeled. Instead of medical supplies, it contained industrial chemicals that had been shipped through a network of shell companies to avoid proper safety protocols. The chemicals were ultimately bound for a manufacturing facility in Western Europe, but the documentation had been falsified to reduce transportation costs. Understanding began to coalesce around the edges of the conversation. And you trace the network. I spent 8 years tracing it, learning languages, acquiring skills, building relationships with people who could help me understand how such things happen. She leaned forward slightly. Do you know what I discovered? That respectable companies use disreputable methods when it serves their interests. That the men who sign the contracts rarely see the containers, and the men who move the containers rarely read the contracts. Her eyes met mine directly. And the families who bury the dead rarely learn why their children had to die for someone else's efficiency. The accusation hung in the air between us like smoke. I understood now why she had married me, why she had spent 3 years learning the rhythms of my life, why she had been photographing security arrangements and studying shipping manifests. I was not her husband. I was her target. What did you find? I asked. Nothing. The admission seemed to surprise her. 3 years of looking, and I found a man who delegates operational details to competent professionals and trusts them to handle matters within legal and ethical boundaries. But you kept looking. I kept looking. She stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the London evening. Because trust is a luxury that families like mine cannot afford. I joined her at the window. Our reflection in the glass looked like a couple sharing an intimate moment. And now I have a choice. She turned to face me. I can continue pursuing a vendetta against a man who appears to be innocent of the specific crime that destroyed my family, or I can use what I've learned to address the larger problem, which is that systems like yours create opportunities for men like the ones who killed my brother. You may not pull triggers or falsify documents, but you build the machinery that makes such things possible. The conversation had reached the point where truth becomes unavoidable. I could deny her characterization, defend my business practices, invoke the legal and ethical standards that governed my operations, but we had moved beyond such comfortable abstractions. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to see what you've built from the perspective of someone who has buried the consequences. That night, we did not sleep together. Elena took the guest room, and I remained in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the woman I had married with the person who had just deconstructed 3 years of shared intimacy with the precision of a forensic accountant. In the morning, she was gone. Not permanently. Her clothes remained in our closet, her books on the nightstand, but absent in the way that suggested she was conducting business I was not meant to observe. I found a note in the kitchen. Gone to Prague. Back Thursday. We'll finish our conversation then. Prague was one of the folders on her encrypted phone. I spent Wednesday trying to concentrate on mundane business, while wondering what Elena was doing in a city where she apparently maintained operational infrastructure. On Thursday evening, she returned carrying a small leather satchel that had not been part of her luggage when she departed. "How was Prague?" I asked over dinner. "Educational." She opened the satchel and removed a manila folder. "I brought you something." Inside the folder were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be testimony transcribed from interviews. The photographs showed cargo containers, loading equipment, and men in work clothes. The documents were shipping manifests, customs forms, and bills of lading. The testimony was from dock workers, truck drivers, and customs inspectors. All of it related to shipments that had moved through ports and warehouses associated with Hale Group operations. All of it documented systematic violations of safety protocols, environmental standards, and worker protection requirements. All of it had been conducted by subcontractors and logistics providers who operated under the protection of legitimate contracts with my companies. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "Based on the evidence I've collected, approximately 8 years, since shortly after you took the company public and began delegating operational oversight to regional managers." I studied the photographs. Workers without proper safety equipment. Containers leaking substances that could not be immediately identified. Loading operations conducted in ways that violated basic industrial safety standards. Why wasn't this reported through normal channels? It was, repeatedly. Eleanor removed another folder from the satchel. "These are copies of reports filed by inspectors, union representatives, and environmental monitoring organizations. They were submitted to your regional offices, your compliance departments, and your corporate headquarters. I never saw them, because they were handled by people whose job was to make sure you never had to see them." The implications were staggering. For 8 years, while I had been focused on strategic planning and financial performance, an entire shadow infrastructure had been operating under my corporate umbrella, generating profits through methods that violated every standard I claimed to uphold. Who else knows about this? More people than you might think, fewer than you might fear. Elena closed the folders. "The question is, what you intend to do with the knowledge." I spent the next 3 days reviewing everything Elena had provided, cross-referencing it with our corporate records, and conducting discreet inquiries with department heads who might have insight into the operational details. The picture that emerged was one of systemic negligence enabled by willful ignorance. I had built an organization large enough that I could avoid seeing its ugly necessities, and I had hired people whose job was to ensure such avoidance remained comfortable. On Sunday morning, I made the first of several decisions that would dismantle the life I had constructed. I called Victoria Chen at home and asked her to meet me at the office. When she arrived, I presented her with copies of Elena's documentation and asked for her explanation. Victoria's response was more devastating than outright criminality would have been. She was neither ignorant nor corrupt. She had been managing a series of impossible contradictions. Shareholders who demanded consistent profitability, regulatory environments that changed without warning, competitors who operated without the ethical constraints she was expected to maintain. The subcontractors who had committed the violations, documented in Elena's folders, had been selected because they offered competitive pricing for services that would have been prohibitively expensive if conducted according to full safety and environmental standards. "Did you think I didn't want to know?" I asked. "I thought you wanted the results without the methods." Her honesty was brutal. "You hired me to produce outcomes within legal parameters. When legal became expensive, I found partners who could deliver the same outcomes through alternative approaches. And when those approaches violated safety standards, I assumed you understood that cost reduction always involves trade-offs." That afternoon, I called Elena and asked her to return to the house. When she arrived, I presented her with a proposal. I would commit to systematic reform. of the Hale Group's operational practices, beginning with immediate termination of contracts with any subcontractor who could not demonstrate compliance with international safety and environmental standards. I would establish independent oversight mechanisms to ensure such problems could not recur. And I would create a foundation dedicated to supporting families affected by industrial accidents in the regions where my companies operated. Elena listened without commenting, then asked a single question. What do you want from me in return? I want to understand whether the person I married still exists, or whether she was always a fiction. She was never a fiction. Eleanor moved to the window where we had conducted our first honest conversation. But she was incomplete. The woman who married you genuinely wanted the life we built together, but she was also someone who had never stopped looking for justice for her brother. And now? Now I'm someone who has found a way to honor both commitments. We spent the next 6 months restructuring the Hale Group's operations according to standards that prioritized safety and environmental compliance over cost efficiency. The process was expensive, complicated, and occasionally painful. Several long-term business relationships had to be terminated. Some markets became economically unviable. Quarterly profits declined significantly, but something unexpected happened during the process. Elena began appearing at business meetings, not as my wife, but as a consultant specializing in operational risk assessment. Her linguistic skills and cultural knowledge proved invaluable in negotiating new arrangements with suppliers and contractors who could meet our enhanced standards. Her understanding of regulatory environments in Eastern Europe and North Africa enabled us to identify partners who shared our commitment to ethical operations. More significantly, the work provided a framework within which we could rebuild our marriage on foundations that acknowledged both who we were and who we had been. Elena remained Katarina, the woman whose brother had died because men like me had built systems that prioritized efficiency over humanity. But she was also Elena, the woman who had chosen to marry me and who continued to choose daily to help me become someone worthy of that choice. The Meridian Foundation, established with an initial endowment of $50 million, began operations 18 months later. Its mission was to provide support for families affected by industrial accidents and to fund independent monitoring of safety practices in industries where regulatory oversight was inconsistent. Elena served as its director, work that allowed her to channel her investigative skills toward constructive purposes. 2 years after Elena had revealed her true identity, I received an unexpected visitor. A young man, perhaps 25, knocked on our front door and asked to speak with me privately. He introduced himself as Marko Novak, Elena's cousin, and explained that he had spent several years trying to locate her after she had disappeared following her brother's death. We thought she was dead, he said simply. Then we heard rumors that she had married a wealthy English businessman. I came to see if it was true. Elena was in Prague that week, conducting research for the foundation. I invited Marko to stay as our guest until she returned. During his visit, he told me stories about Elena's childhood that filled gaps in my understanding of the woman I had married. She had always been methodical, determined, protective of people who could not protect themselves. The intelligence operation she had conducted against me was entirely consistent with the person her family remembered. When Elena returned and found her cousin in our kitchen, she broke down completely, the first time I had seen her lose control in 5 years of knowing her. They spoke in Serbian for hours, updating each other on family news, mutual friends, the gradual process of rebuilding lives after trauma. Watching them together, I understood that Elena's deception had not been motivated by malice, but by love. Specifically, by the love that survives when everyone you trust has been taken from you. Marko stayed with us for 2 weeks. On his last evening, Elena organized a small dinner party, the first time she had invited guests from her previous life to interact with people from our shared one. The conversation moved between Serbian, English, and French as Elena translated for various participants. The evening felt like a bridge between two worlds that had previously existed in isolation. After Marco left, Elena and I had our most honest conversation since the night she had revealed her identity. "Do you regret marrying me?" she asked. "I regret that you felt you had to lie about why you were doing it." I considered the question carefully. "But I don't regret the marriage, even knowing it began as an investigation." "It didn't begin as an investigation," she said. "It began as an investigation. It became something else." "When?" "The first time you brought me tea when I was working late. You asked if I was comfortable, if I needed anything, if you were disturbing me." She smiled at the memory. "I realized you were someone who noticed when other people needed care. That wasn't what I had expected to find." "What had you expected?" "A man who had learned not to see inconvenient truths. Someone who had insulated himself from the consequences of his choices." She paused. "Someone I could hate without reservation." "And instead?" "Instead, I found someone who was willing to change when confronted with evidence that change was necessary." "Oh, we have been married for 7 years now. The Hale Group operates according to standards that cost us money and occasionally cost us business, but which allow me to sleep without wondering whose brother might die because I chose efficiency over safety. The Meridian Foundation has supported more than 300 families and funded safety improvements at industrial facilities in 12 countries. Elena still maintains the skills that allowed her to conduct a 3-year intelligence operation from our music room, but she now uses those skills to identify problems before they become tragedies, rather than to document tragedies after they become unavoidable. Last month, she told me she was pregnant. The news felt like a gift we had not known we wanted until we received it. We spent the evening discussing names, schools, the kind of world we wanted to build for someone who would inherit both our histories. "What will you tell our child about how we met?" Elena asked. "The truth," I said. "That sometimes the people who challenge us most directly are the ones who love us most completely, and that sometimes the worst discovery you can make about yourself becomes the first step toward becoming someone worth discovering." The second smartphone is in my desk drawer now, disconnected and silent. I keep it as a reminder that every life contains multiple versions of itself, and we become the version we choose to feed. Eleanor chose to feed the version of herself that could love someone she had originally intended to destroy. I chose to feed the version of myself that could earn that love. But transformation is not a destination. It is a practice. Each morning, we choose again who we will be that day. Each evening, we assess whether our choices moved us closer to or further from the people we aspire to become. The house is quieter now, but it is not silent. In the music room, Elena plays the Chopin ballade she once described as a metaphor for marriage. I have learned to appreciate its complexity, the way it builds tension and releases it, the way it finds resolution not by avoiding dissonance, but by incorporating it into a larger harmony. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the container that exploded in Mostar and killed Elena's brother. I wonder what would have happened if the men who signed those contracts had been required to visit the docks, to meet the workers, to understand the human cost of their efficiency. I wonder whether tragedy is inevitable in systems as complex as the ones we build, or whether it is simply the price we pay for choosing not to look closely enough at our own machinery. I do not have answers to these questions, but I have learned that asking them is more important than having answers. And I have learned that a marriage can survive almost anything, including the discovery that it began as something else entirely, as long as both people are willing to become who they need to be for each other. The worst thing that can happen to you is not being deceived by someone you love. The worst thing is discovering that you have been living as someone unworthy of being loved authentically. Elena gave me the opportunity to become someone she could love without reservation. That gift was more valuable than any truth she had hidden from me. But the most valuable gift was simpler. She showed me that change is possible, even for men like me who had convinced ourselves that we were already who we were supposed to be. In the end, we are all carrying second smartphones, secret versions of ourselves that we think are too dangerous or too shameful to share. The question is whether we will find the courage to unlock them for the people who matter most, and whether we will have the wisdom to use what we find there to build something better than what we were hiding.